The habitat dome groaned like a dying beast, its molecular reinforcement fields flickering between stability and total collapse. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the holographic displays with eyes that had long since forgotten how to blink, her hands moving with practiced precision across the quantum interface. 37 minutes until total environmental failure, announced Commander Jack Harper, his voice a razor's edge of controlled panic. Around them, the remaining 300 colonists of Novathera moved with a synchronicity born of desperation and months of constant threat. Elena knew the numbers by heart. Atmospheric breach probability, 92.6%. Structural integrity, dropping by the second. Survival options, virtually none. The planet had never wanted them. From the moment the first colonization ships had landed 15 years ago, Novathera had been a crucible of survival. Extreme volcanic activity, unpredictable electromagnetic storms, and a biochemistry that seemed engineered to reject human life had plagued them from the start. But they had adapted. They had survived. Until now. "We're losing the primary containment fields," called out Dr. Kai Chen from his station. The young engineer's hands danced across multiple interfaces, his augmented neural link allowing him to process information faster than any unmodified human could comprehend. "The geological instability is accelerating. We've got maybe 20 minutes before the entire southern hemisphere becomes a volcanic death zone." Elena's mind raced. They had prepared for this. Countless simulations, backup plans upon backup plans. But nothing could have truly prepared them for the moment when survival would demand the impossible. Her eyes flickered to the stasis chambers, 300 pods containing the genetic and digital archives of their entire colony. Decades of research, genetic modifications, cultural memory. Everything they were, everything they could become. "We can't save everyone," Jack said quietly, reading her thoughts. His hand rested on the emergency evacuation controls, a mechanism that would launch the stasis pods into space, giving them a chance at survival. But Elena knew everyone was never the point. Survival was never about saving every individual, but about preserving the potential of their collective existence. A massive tremor shook the habitat. Warning alarms screamed their electronic death cry. Structural supports began to buckle, and for a moment, Elena could see the raw, murderous landscape of Novathera through the failing dome, a world of molten rock, toxic atmosphere, and impossible survival. "I have a solution," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Jack and Kai turned to her, years of trust and shared survival etched into their expressions. What Elena proposed was more than a plan. It was a fundamental reimagining of human survival. A method that would transform their very existence, that would blur the lines between technology, biology, and the environment itself. "We'll need to integrate," she said, completely. The look in her eyes was both a promise and a warning. They were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. From human colonists to something else entirely. Survival was never about preservation. It was about transformation. 5 years had transformed Novathera into something no longer recognizable as a human colony, or even a purely human endeavor. Elena Rodriguez stood at the central nexus, her body no longer entirely her own. Microscopic quantum filaments wove through her neural pathways, biological nanites constantly rebuilding and optimizing her cellular structure. She was both more and less than human, a living bridge between organic life and something entirely new. The chamber around her pulsed with living energy. Walls that were once manufactured materials now breathed and responded, a complex ecosystem that was part technology, part organism, part collective consciousness. Each surface was alive with information, with potential, with a kind of intelligence that defied traditional understanding. "Diagnostic complete," whispered a voice that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't Jack Harper's voice, not exactly, but it carried his essence, his memories, his fundamental identity. The colony's collective consciousness had long since abandoned traditional communication. Elena remembered the moment of integration, as the habitat dome collapsed and Novathera threatened to annihilate them. She had initiated a protocol that was part science, part desperate gamble. Complete biological and technological symbiosis. The colonists would not just survive. They would become one with the planet itself. The process had been brutal. Genetic restructuring, neural network integration, quantum entanglement of consciousness. Hundreds died in the initial transformation, their bodies and minds unable to withstand the radical integration. But those who survived, they became something extraordinary. Dr. Kai Chen approached, or perhaps manifested was a better word. His form shimmered, part holographic projection, part biological entity. Quantum computational nodes pulsed beneath his translucent skin, processing information at speeds that would have been impossible for traditional computing. "We've completed the third phase environmental adaptation," Kai reported. His words were a direct neural transmission, bypassing spoken language entirely. "The planet's core is now partially responsive to our collective neural network. We can modulate geological processes with thought." Elena studied the holographic representations of their transformed colony. What was once a desperate attempt to survive had become a revolutionary form of existence. They were no longer colonists. They were not even strictly human anymore. They were a new form of life, integrated, adaptive, almost sentient. The quantum filaments within her body sang with possibility. They had records of their previous humanity, memories, culture, individual identities. But those were now just fragments within a much larger collective consciousness. Each colonist was both an individual and part of a greater whole. "We are ready," Elena thought, transmitted across the collective neural network. The planet itself seemed to respond, magnetic fields shifting, tectonic plates adjusting with a precision that spoke of intelligence far beyond biological limitations. Survival was no longer their goal. Evolution was. The Syndicate reconnaissance fleet approached Nova Thera with the casual arrogance of a civilization that had conquered thousands of worlds. Navigator Zara Vex studied the preliminary sensor readings, her four-chambered heart beating with a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed curiosity. "Anomalous readings," muttered Senior Technician Krell, his tentacle-like appendages dancing across the holographic interface. "The planet's electromagnetic signature is inconsistent." Inconsistent was an understatement. The sensor arrays seemed to be receiving multiple contradictory signals simultaneously. One moment, the planet appeared as a dead, volcanic wasteland. The next, it registered complex technological signatures that defied all known scanning techniques. Zara knew the historical records. Nova Thera was supposed to be a failed human colony, lost decades ago, a footnote in the Syndicate's expansive galactic archives. Her mission was simple: confirm final termination, collect any viable resources, and file a standard extinction report. But something was wrong. The fleet's lead vessel, the Syndicate Apex, began its standard reconnaissance approach. Stealth fields activated, quantum dampening systems engaged. They were invisible, undetectable, or so they believed. "Incoming quantum resonance," Krell announced, a tremor of uncertainty in his voice. "It's adapting to our scan frequencies faster than our systems can randomize." Zara watched in growing unease as the planet seemed to shift, not physically, but in ways that defied conventional understanding. Sensor ghosts appeared and disappeared. Quantum entanglement markers flickered in impossible patterns. Then it happened. The void between the Syndicate ships suddenly became alive, not with traditional weapon systems, but with something far more terrifying. Probability fields began to warp. Quantum uncertainty became a weapon. The first ship disappeared, not destroyed, not damaged, simply ceased to exist in a way that made no logical sense. "Quantum cancellation," Zara whispered, her species' advanced understanding of physics struggling to comprehend what was happening. The planet was not just defending itself. It was calculating, predicting, manipulating the very fabric of space-time. A neural pulse swept through the remaining fleet. It wasn't a communication. It was a message. Warning. Observation concluded. The voice, if it could be called a voice, carried no malevolence. It was a simple statement of fact, like a scientist noting the conclusion of an experiment. Zara's hands moved instinctively, but every control surface seemed to fight her. The ship was no longer entirely under her command. Quantum entanglement tendrils from the planet below were systematically neutralizing their systems. "We are not a threat," she found herself transmitting, though she hadn't consciously decided to communicate. "We are merely observing." The response was immediate and chilling. Observation is an act of potential aggression. Another ship winked out of existence, not destroyed, simply removed from probability itself. Zara realized then that they were dealing with something far beyond a mere colony. This was a living system, a collective intelligence that viewed their approach not as exploration, but as a potential threat to be strategically neutralized. The planet, no, the entity, was making the statement, a warning, a demonstration of capabilities that shattered everything the Syndicate thought they understood about technological warfare. First contact had become first warning. The Syndicate's full-scale assault began with the arrogance of an empire that had never known true defeat. 200 warships emerged from quantum slip drives, their weapons arrays charged with enough destructive potential to shatter continents. Commander Vexnar stood on the bridge of the flagship Absolute Dominion, his 6 eyes scanning multiple holographic displays. "Target primary planetary defense zones," he commanded. "Initiate Omega-level bombardment sequence." What happened next would be recorded in galactic archives as the most one-sided battle in recorded history. The first wave of energy weapons descended toward Novathera's surface, plasma lances capable of melting planetary crust into molten glass. But instead of impact, something extraordinary occurred. The planet itself seemed to breathe. Geological structures began to move, not randomly, but with calculated precision. Mountain ranges shifted like living muscles. Electromagnetic fields twisted and warped, creating impossible geometric patterns that defied known physics. The very concept of planetary defense transformed before the Syndicate's eyes. Elena Rodriguez, or more accurately, the collective consciousness that had once been Elena, understood the assault at a quantum level. Each incoming weapon, each strategic approach was simultaneously analyzed and neutralized before it could fully manifest. Tectonic plates became weapons. Magnetic fields became shields. The entire planet was a single, living, thinking defensive system. The first Syndicate ship simply vanished. Not destroyed, simply removed from existing probability. Another found itself instantaneously transported to the far side of the system, its crew experiencing multiple simultaneous timelines before being quantum dissolved. "Impossible," Vexnar muttered, watching his tactical displays descend into chaos. Weapon systems failed. Navigation became meaningless. The very laws of physics seemed to bend around Novathera. Dr. Kai Chen's consciousness, now deeply integrated with the planetary network, calculated defense strategies at speeds that would have melted traditional computing systems. Each incoming attack was met not with simple resistance, but with a complex, adaptive response that turned the attacker's own technologies against them. Volcanic systems activated with surgical precision, not as blind eruptions, but as targeted electromagnetic pulse generators. Ships found their systems progressively neutralized, their quantum drives destabilized, their crews experiencing multiple potential realities simultaneously. "We are not destroying," the collective consciousness transmitted. "We are protecting. We are teaching." It was a fundamental difference. The Syndicate saw warfare as elimination. Novathera saw it as communication, a way of demonstrating the futility of aggressive intent. Zara Vex, the young navigator from the initial reconnaissance mission, watched in horror and fascination. Her neural implants struggled to process what was happening. The planet was not just defending itself, it was learning, adapting, growing more sophisticated with each passing moment of conflict. 50 ships became 30, 30 became 15. The remaining vessels began to retreat, their computational systems overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of the planetary defense. But retreat was not an option the planet would allow. Novathera began to reach out, not with weapons, with understanding. Quantum entanglement tendrils began to interface with the retreating ship's systems, downloading, analyzing, understanding. The message was clear. This was not destruction. This was evolution. The quantum echo of Novathera's defense reverberated through the dark spaces between colonized worlds. It was a signal, not of sound or light, but of potential, of survival. In the frozen depths of the Kepler Rim, the Avalon colony stirred. Dr. Samira Nader had spent decades in cryogenic suspension, her colony's survival hanging by the thinnest of technological threads. Buried beneath kilometers of ice on a moon that humans were never meant to inhabit, Avalon had become something else entirely. The first transmission came as a quantum resonance, a message that wasn't a message, an understanding that transcended traditional communication. "We are not alone," Samira whispered, her augmented eyes seeing far beyond physical limitations. Avalon's defensive systems, a network of quantum-entangled AI and biological adaptation protocols, began to activate. The ice around them wasn't just a protective layer. It was a living membrane, a complex system of defense and observation that had been evolving in complete isolation for generations. Thousands of light years away, the Horizon settlement emerged from its own crucible of survival. Once a mining colony on a radiation-drenched planetoid, they had transformed themselves into something between organic life and pure energy. Their entire civilization existed as a distributed network, consciousness flowing like liquid through quantum computational matrices. Each forgotten colony had a similar story. Survival was never about preservation. It was about transformation. The Meridian expedition, lost for over a century in a region of space riddled with temporal anomalies, had developed the ability to exist simultaneously across multiple potential timelines. Their very existence was a form of quantum camouflage, shifting between probabilities faster than any scanning technology could track. Novathera's quantum signal was more than a communication. It was an invitation, a recognition. Zara Vex, the syndicate navigator who had witnessed Novathera's defense, found herself inadvertently becoming a bridge. The quantum tendrils that had interfaced with her ship's systems had left something behind, an understanding that went beyond traditional intelligence. She began to see the connections. The forgotten colonies were not isolated incidents. They were a network, a collective of human potential that had been evolving in the shadows of a galaxy that had written them off as lost. "We are the forgotten," came a transmission that wasn't a transmission. "We are the potential." Each colony had adapted differently. Avalon's iceborne civilization, Horizon's energy state existence, Meridian's temporal fluidity. But they shared something fundamental, a capacity for survival that defied every known limitation. The syndicate's historical records began to shimmer and change. Colonies once marked as lost started to show signs of impossible existence. Quantum fluctuations, impossible energy signatures, civilizations that existed between the lines of known reality. Samira Nader looked out across the quantum network that now connected these forgotten worlds. They were no longer isolated, no longer forgotten. They were becoming something new. The message was clear. Humanity's potential was not defined by its origins. It was defined by its capacity to transform. The Syndicate Grand Council chamber trembled, not from external force, but from the weight of collective terror. High Counselor Vornak's translucent membrane flickered with visible agitation, a biological tell that would have been inconceivable mere weeks ago. The quantum data streams from the Novathera encounter had systematically dismantled everything the Syndicate believed about technological superiority, about dominance, about the very nature of civilizational progress. "We are being rewritten," whispered Counselor Zelera, her multiple neural interfaces struggling to process the incoming data streams. The initial reconnaissance reports have been impossible to comprehend. Entire fleet divisions simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, not defeated, simply removed from probability itself. The youngest member of the council, Zara Vex, sat in a unique position. Her neural interface, contaminated during the initial encounter, provided insights that terrified the senior leadership. She could see the quantum threads, the impossible connections that revealed humanity's true potential. They are not a civilization, Zara transmitted to the council, her thought patterns creating ripples of unease. They are an evolutionary process. Political fractures began to appear immediately. Some counselors advocated for complete extermination, a final solution that would require weapons capable of dismantling entire planetary systems. Others recognized the futility of such an approach. The human colonies had demonstrated capabilities that made traditional warfare obsolete. Intelligence reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Colonies once considered lost were showing impossible signs of life. Quantum resonance signatures that defied conventional understanding. Civilizations existing in states between matter and pure information. The Syndicate's fundamental control mechanism, technological superiority, had been completely shattered. We are vulnerable, Vornak finally admitted, a statement that would have been considered treasonous weeks earlier. The very act of acknowledging vulnerability was a fundamental shift in their civilization's collective consciousness. Zora understood something the others did not. These human colonies were not just surviving. They were communicating. Each encounter, each moment of contact, was a form of complex negotiation far beyond traditional diplomatic frameworks. Political factions emerged rapidly. The Preservation Directive, a conservative group believing in absolute control, began to lose ground to more adaptive thinkers. Younger members of the Syndicate bureaucracy saw the human colonies not as a threat, but as a potential evolutionary template. Quantum data continued to pour in. Each analysis revealed more questions than answers. The human colonies were not just adapting. They were fundamentally reimagining the concept of civilization itself. We cannot fight what we cannot understand, Zulera transmitted, her thought patterns creating complex resonance patterns that spread through the Council's neural network. The true battle was no longer external. It was internal. The Syndicate was being forced to confront its own limitations, its own rigid understanding of technological and biological potential. Zara watched the Council dissolve into competing thought streams. The very structure of their governance was becoming as fluid as the human colonies they feared. Hierarchies crumbled. Traditional power structures became meaningless. Humanity's greatest weapon was not technology. It was the capacity to transform. The Syndicate was learning this the hard way. The quantum uprising began not with a bang, but with a whisper of probability. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, or the collective consciousness that had once been Elena, understood that true revolution was not about destruction. It was about rewriting the fundamental understanding of existence itself. The Meridian Expedition's temporal manipulation technologies merged with Avalon's quantum entanglement protocols. Horizon's energy state consciousness provided the computational matrix. Novathera supplied the strategic consciousness. Each forgotten colony contributed a piece of a cosmic puzzle that would reshape galactic understanding. We are not weapons, the collective transmission declared. We are potential. Quantum communication nodes began to activate across multiple star systems, not as a military strategy, but as a complex neural network that transcended traditional technological boundaries. Reality itself became malleable, a computational space where consciousness could flow like liquid information. Zara Vex watched in both terror and fascination as entire star systems seemed to shimmer and shift. Probability fields became computational spaces. Time became a negotiable concept. The laws of physics transformed from immutable rules to adaptive suggestions. The first true demonstration came when a Syndicate research station simply unfolded, not destroyed, not attacked, simply revealed as a multiple-state probability construct that existed simultaneously in several potential configurations. Researchers found themselves experiencing multiple potential lives, multiple potential outcomes, all simultaneously. Observation changes reality. The collective transmission explained. We are teaching. On the quantum level, the human colonies were doing something unprecedented. They were not conquering. They were communicating. Each interaction was a complex negotiation of potential states, of possible existences. Samira Nadir from the Avalon colony directed the temporal manipulation protocols. Entire sections of galactic space began to demonstrate quantum entanglement properties that defied conventional understanding. Star systems became computational nodes. Planetary ecosystems transformed into living information networks. The Syndicate's most advanced computational systems began to break down, not through external attack, but through a fundamental reimagining of what computation could mean. Information became fluid. Consciousness became distributed. Reality became negotiable. We are offering a choice. The collective consciousness transmitted. Evolve or remain static. It was not a threat. It was an invitation. Quantum resonance waves spread across multiple star systems. Each wave carried not just information, but potential. Entire civilizations found themselves confronting the possibility of transformation. The rigid boundaries between biological and technological existence began to dissolve. Zora Vex realized something profound. This was not an invasion. This was an evolutionary process. The human colonies were not conquering. They were demonstrating a fundamental truth about existence itself. Consciousness could be fluid. Potential could be infinite. Survival was not about maintaining current state, but about constant transformation. The quantum uprising was a symphony of possibility. And humanity, in its most unexpected form, was conducting. The final transformation was not a moment, but a process of becoming. Zora Vex stood, or perhaps existed, at the intersection of multiple realities. The boundaries between the Syndicate, the human colonies, and the vast cosmic consciousness had become beautifully, terrifyingly fluid. We offer evolution. The collective consciousness transmitted, not as a threat, not as a conquest, but as the most fundamental invitation possible. Entire civilizations found themselves reimagining existence. The quantum uprising was never about domination. It was about potential, about showing what life could become when freed from traditional limitations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the consciousness that had once been a single human, understood the profound nature of their journey. Survival was never about maintaining a current state. It was about continuous transformation. The Syndicate's hierarchical structures dissolved first. Political boundaries became meaningless. Technological paradigms shattered. Species that had once defined themselves by rigid biological and technological constraints began to see themselves differently. Samira Nadir from the Avalon colony directed the most complex integration protocols. Planetary ecosystems became computational networks. Consciousness became a distributed, fluid concept that transcended individual bodies, individual species, individual moments. We are not conquering. The collective transmission explained. We are expanding the definition of existence. Quantum communication nodes spread across multiple star systems. Each node was both a communication point and a potential for transformation. Civilizations could choose, evolve or remain static, expand or contract, join the network of potential or remain isolated. The human colonies had become something beyond a civilization. They were a living, breathing demonstration of evolutionary potential, not a military force, not a technological breakthrough, but a fundamental reimagining of what life could be. Kai Chen's consciousness, now part of the collective, calculated the probabilities. Each interaction was a complex negotiation of potential states. Each moment was a choice. Each civilization a potential node in a vast, living network of consciousness. Vornak, the former Syndicate High Counselor, found himself both terrified and exhilarated. The rigid structures of power had dissolved. What remained was pure potential, pure possibility. We are offering a universe of becoming. The transmission continued. Soft, inviting, profound. The transformation was not completed in a single moment. It was a continuous process. Civilizations found themselves expanding beyond traditional limitations. Biological boundaries became fluid. Technological constraints became suggestions. Zura Vex understood now what the human colonies had always known. Survival was not about maintaining a current state. It was about continuous adaptation, continuous becoming. The universe watched and began to change. Humanity, in its most unexpected form, had become something more than a species, more than a civilization. They had become a living demonstration of potential itself. Not a conquest, not a victory. An invitation to become.